The wind on the Yorkshire moors has a way of carrying sound farther than it should. It drags whispers across the heather, pulls old secrets out of the peat, and makes even the surest traveler feel as if something is following just behind them, just out of sight. And for more than 2 centuries, people swore they knew exactly what that something was. A massive, coal-black horse with burning eyes, a creature that didn't gallop so much as glide, a thing that watched from the mist before misfortune struck. The Gytrash. Tonight, we're going to walk those old roads together, roads lit only by memory, rumor, and the brittle pages of Yorkshire folklore. But be warned, the moors don't just hold stories, they hold echoes, and once you hear them, they're hard to forget. The earliest accounts always begin the same way. A traveler heading home late, the sky sinking into that strange in-between color before night fully commits. In the mid-17th century, long before gas lamps or railway lines reached this part of England, these moor paths were lifelines, stony, uneven tracks carved by hooves and hobnailed boots. Shepherds, merchants, and farmhands knew every turning and ridge by heart. But the moors shift at night. Mist crawls up from the dales, shapes blur, and distance becomes unreliable. You think a gate is 10 paces ahead, only to find it's 50. You think you're alone, until you're not. One of the most frequently repeated sightings comes from an 18th century wool merchant named Elias Turner. His journal still survives, kept in a small local collection near Whitby. On a storm-heavy October evening in 1752, Turner wrote that he was traveling from Pickering toward Glaisdale with a cart of cloth when his horse suddenly refused to move. It dug its hooves into the muddy track and trembled. Turner stepped down, assuming the animal had startled at lightning or scent of a fox. But then he saw it. He described a black steed of prodigious size, standing utterly still atop a rise in the moor. Lightning flashed behind it, giving it a silhouette too large, too sharply defined to be natural. The eyes, Turner wrote, were as coals newly tossed upon a fire. No sound, no breathing, just a silent watching. Turner did what any man alone on the moors might do. He blinked, looked again, only to find the shape had vanished. But the moment it disappeared, the air changed. The storm broke with violent suddenness, and within minutes his cart was overturned by wind. Turner survived only by crawling into the shelter of a stone wall until morning. The next day, a shepherd passing that road found Turner's horse dead, its eyes wide and glassy as though it had suffered a terrifying shock. People claimed that the Gytrash never attacked. It warned. It appeared as a harbinger, an omen that something terrible was coming. Not all omens are gifts, of course. Some only exist to remind you that you're being watched. What makes the legend compelling isn't just one traveler's fear, it's that the same description appears again and again, across decades, across villages that never compared stories. Dr. John Nicholson, a collector of Yorkshire folk beliefs in the early 1800s, recorded over a dozen such accounts in his notebooks, most from people with no reputations for superstition. These were farmers, carters, midwives, even a local magistrate. One of Nicholson's most chilling entries tells the story of a young servant girl named Mary Atkinson, who walked the moor road from Hawes to Bainbridge in 1819. She'd left her employer's home after receiving news her father had fallen ill. The path was dark, lit only by a lantern she held close to her apron. Partway through the journey, she saw a black horse standing motionless in the middle of the track ahead. She later said it didn't seem to block her way. It seemed to wait. The horse didn't move as she approached, didn't turn its head, didn't stamp or snort. She said its eyes glowed faintly, like cinders dying in a grate. Instead of passing it, Mary stepped off the road clutching her lantern, scrambling over heather until she found a parallel sheep track. She walked the rest of the way to Bainbridge, shaking so badly she could hardly speak. She arrived just after dawn, only to learn her father had died during the night, the same hour she'd seen the horse. For many, that connection between the Gytrash and death became more than folklore. It became a quiet certainty, a thing whispered in farm kitchens and cold stone parlors. If you see the black horse of the moors, turn back. Something is coming. Of course, not every account involved death. Some involved disappearance. One that has endured in local retellings is the 1834 disappearance of a mill worker named Jonathan Briggs. Briggs was a young man known for drinking and late-night wanderings. He'd left the village of Hutton-le-Hole late one evening, insisting he could cross the moors to Rosedale before the storm clouds rolled in. He never reached the other side. Search parties found no trace of him for 3 days. But they found something else. Near a steep ravine, partly hidden by bracken, were hoof prints, massive, far larger than any common horse could make. No farmer in the area owned an animal so large. The prints led straight toward the ravine's edge, then simply stopped. No signs of slipping, no broken ground, no drag marks, just an ending. Locals whispered that Briggs had followed the Gytrash, mistaking it for a real horse through the rain, believing it was leading him toward safety. Instead, whatever he followed led him straight into the moor mist and out of living memory. Briggs's body was found months later at the ravine bottom, battered by storms and time. His face, according to the parish warden who helped recover him, wore a look of such dreadful fear one hoped never to witness its like again. The warden, a man named Hargrave, had seen death many times. His words carried weight. Throughout the Victorian era, the Gytrash's legend only grew. The Industrial Revolution brought railways, mining villages, and mill towns, but the moors remained vast and largely unchanged. These desolate stretches were places where the old beliefs refused to die. Even as England modernized, the people here still lit their hearths with peat, still mended their own boots, and still believed, perhaps secretly, that not everything on the moors was meant to be understood. Writers began to notice the legend, too. By the late 1800s, the Gytrash appeared in regional lore collections and even literature. One of the most famous references is in Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, where the creature is described as a spectral black dog or horse haunting lonely roads. Bronte grew up near the moors, heard the stories, felt the atmosphere. Her inclusion wasn't random. It reflected a belief deeply rooted in the landscape she walked daily. But perhaps the most unsettling accounts came from people who weren't prone to fear, mounted constables who patrolled the moors at night. One constable's report from 1857 still circulates through local archives. Constable Abel Lodge was riding near Westerdale on a moonless night when his horse stopped abruptly. Lodge, trained and steady, thought it might be a wild pony. He lifted his lantern, and the beam fell upon a towering black horse 15 yards ahead. At first, he tried calling to it, assuming it belonged to one of the wealthy estates, but the horse didn't react. Its mane didn't move in the wind. Its shadow stretched across the road in a way Lodge found unnatural. He urged his own mount forward, until the creature's eyes caught the lantern light and glowed red as blood. Lodge dismounted and backed away on foot, leading his trembling horse until the apparition faded from view. Minutes later, a landslide crashed down on the very stretch of road where he'd seen the horse. He likely would have died had he continued. When Lodge wrote his report, he didn't call it a ghost. He didn't label it superstition. He simply said, "I thank the Lord for whatever warned me." That phrase appears again and again in accounts from the late 1800s. The Gytrash wasn't merely a monster. It was an omen, a watcher, a dark presence tied to the land in ways no one fully understood. As telegraph lines crossed the moors and roads became better patrolled, sightings declined. By the end of the 19th century, the Black Horse had become a story told near fireplaces, a thing grandparents whispered with a smile, pretending not to believe. But even then, on nights when the wind howled across the heather, some still claimed they heard heavy hooves pacing just beyond the lantern light. And even today, hikers occasionally write, quietly, anonymously, about seeing something in the mist. A shape too large to be a natural horse, eyes that glow faintly in the dark, prints too big for any living animal. Folklore never truly dies. It waits. Waits in the places untouched by time, in the hollowed paths where thousands of boots once passed and where the veil between this world and whatever lies beside it thins with every storm. And the Yorkshire moors, broad, bleak, windswept, remain one of those places. The old stories cling to the peat and the heather the way mist clings to the hillsides. By the late 19th century, even as villages expanded and industrial towns swallowed more of the countryside, the moors resisted. They stayed wild. They stayed dangerous. And the Gytrash, people said, belonged to that wildness. You could scrub superstition out of a school book, but you couldn't scrub it out of a place like this. One of the last major recorded sightings before the turn of the century came from a man named Samuel Howden, a railway engineer. This story stands out because Howden wasn't superstitious, wasn't local, and wasn't the type to be rattled by ghost tales. He was a man of mathematics, steel, and schedules, the kind needed to expand the Northeastern Railway across hostile, uneven ground. In 1892, Howden was surveying a route across the moorland between Castleton and Danby. The clouds hung low, the light dim, but he pressed on alone. He had a pocket watch in one hand, a measuring chain in the other, and a lantern hooked to his belt as the wind picked up. There was no sound but the shifting of bracken and the distant cry of a curlew. Then his lantern flickered. Something moved ahead of him. Something big. Howden later described the shape as a great black horse, large enough that it seemed to blot out the very moor behind it. It didn't approach. It didn't flee. It simply stood at the crest of a ridge as though guarding the land beyond. He shouted to it, expecting it to be astray. Again, there was no reaction. He moved toward it. And that's when he saw the eyes. Two burning points of red that glowed even in the dim daylight. Howden froze. A lifelong skeptic found himself unable to take a single step closer. For several long seconds the wind died, the mist thickened, and the landscape felt eerily muted. Then the entire ridge ahead collapsed. The earth gave way in a sudden landslip, tons of soil and rock sliding into the valley below. It happened right where the horse had stood. Had Howden taken even 10 more steps, he would have gone with it. The horse, of course, was gone. Howden refused to speak publicly about the incident, but he told his wife, who passed the account to a local historian decades later. His original field notes from that day include a brief line scratched in the margin: warning or madness. It remains the only time he ever questioned his own senses in his long career. Stories like his became the quiet closing chapter of the Gytrash legend. Sightings rooted in fear, in gratitude, and in a sense of encountering something older, deeper, and darker than a mere ghost. The more you study these accounts, the more patterns emerge. The Gytrash appears during transitions, storms, illness, life's turning points, moments where the moors themselves seem restless. It appears to lone travelers, especially those crossing land that has seen tragedy before, ancient boundaries, burial sites, long-forgotten footpaths, and it never appears to groups, only to individuals walking the thin line between safety and danger. Folklorists believe the creature served a symbolic purpose, a way for communities to explain death and misfortune in a landscape that could kill without warning. Sinkholes, river floods, sudden storms, exhaustion, and isolation. These were all part of moorland life. When the land itself threatens you, it becomes easier to imagine that the threat has a face, or, in this case, a shape. And yet, the consistency of details remains striking. The size, the silence, the eyes, the way livestock panicked before sightings, the uncanny stillness that followed. Even researchers with no belief in the supernatural acknowledge that the legend's longevity suggests something, whether psychological, environmental, or cultural, was genuinely experienced by generations of people living and traveling across Yorkshire. But folklore is more than survival. It's identity. The Gytrash became part of the moor's personality, part of the invisible architecture of the land. To tell the history of Yorkshire without its ghosts is to leave out half the story. Even in the 21st century, the legend hasn't fully died. Park rangers occasionally hear hikers report being followed by a large dark animal in the mist. Farmers joke, half seriously, that their horses refuse certain paths at dusk. You'll sometimes find a tourist blog or local paper recording odd sightings in the corner of a photograph or a strange silhouette on a ridge. Is it a lingering superstition, a trick of fog and fear? Or does something still walk the moors, keeping its silent vigil the way it did for centuries? Because that's the unsettling part. The Gytrash never harmed anyone directly. It never chased. It never screamed. It simply appeared, watched, and waited, as if its purpose was not to kill but to warn, as if it wasn't a beast of death but a sentinel of it. Imagine walking alone across the moors today, the wind low, the heather bending, the ancient stone walls breaking the landscape into crooked lines. You feel the earth soften beneath your boots. The mist thickens. A shape forms on the ridge, tall, unmoving. You blink, and it disappears. Do you keep walking, or do you turn back? Most people, even now, would turn back, and perhaps that's exactly what the Gytrash has always wanted. Some legends survive because they thrill. Others survive because they frighten. But the Gytrash survives because, for the people of Yorkshire, it felt real enough, and saved enough lives that ignoring it simply wasn't worth the risk. And the moors, vast, ancient, and indifferent, feel like the kind of place where a creature like that wouldn't just exist, but belong.
Thank you for watching C&T Horror Stories, where the shadows speak and the night never ends. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because there are many more stories waiting in the dark, and they're getting impatient.